All right, you're very welcome along to the latest episode of the Classic Game Club. And this week's Classic Game is one I think that probably everybody over the age of 30 in Ireland will remember. June 18th, 1994, Giant Stadium, New Jersey, USA World Cup, and arguably Irish football's greatest ever day as Jack Charlton's Ireland beat Arrigo Sacchi's Italy 1-0 thanks to that unforgettable goal from Ray Houghton. As always on the Classic Game Club, we have watched back the full 90 minutes, and over the next hour or so, we'll be giving our post-game analysis 26 years on. That's right, it's 26 years ago now. Joining me for this episode of the Classic Game Club, two very special guests. Vinny Perth is the manager of the League of Ireland champions Dundalk. How you been keeping, Vinny?
All good, yeah, safe and well. So, looking forward to it.
Good to hear. And David Meyler, the former Republic of Ireland international, is with us as well. How are you keeping, David?
I'm good, thank you.
We should, in the interest of honesty, I just point out to our listeners and our viewers, anybody who has ever seen David on the show will know he's got the best technical setup of anybody, thanks to him. And I presume during this crisis, David, that being a professional gamer is the one industry that's absolutely booming.
It is, yeah. Obviously, with self-isolation, the way things are going on at the moment, I play FIFA now every morning. I stream it just to pass the time. So I do 3 or 4 hours in the morning, just to keep myself occupied.
So you've got your 10 jerseys on the background. We should say you just changed one to add Messi in.
It's 15.
Just to really show off.
It's 15. There's another row above, but the way the camera is set.
Oh, yeah.
So
we're too modest for that, Vinny.
Yeah, I didn't. I left the League of Ireland memorabilia off the wall.
Well, the league winners' medals, David, you know.
Yeah. Well, I think that wallpaper's too fancy to put it on.
There's always one lad who goes big time, isn't there? There's always one lad that takes
it. It's just the way I've always had it set up.
Yeah. Oh. So this match, Republic of Ireland against Italy, it's one of those JFK moments in many ways for Irish football. I think everybody of a certain age remembers where they were when Ray Houghton put the ball into the back of the Italian net. Vinny, do you remember the day? Do you remember watching the match first time around?
Yeah, I do. It was obviously around that time where it was real special. We had 1990, 88, where a little bit younger, so a little bit older than the 2 years. So I do remember I was 17 and a half, that type of age. So went down to the Spawell pub, and it was one of those big parties that ended up the nightclub from it. So I was just under 18, but I was old enough to get in, and it was the right age. Wasn't a big drinker, so I don't remember being completely drunk, but at the same time, it was such a special time. Like the roads were empty, travelling down, it was all about getting ready for the match. And I wonder, would it be the same now if we had those same moments? But it was like lockdown. It was lockdown mode as such. The whole country went in, everything stopped, and it was a real special time.
It was probably different as well to Italian 90, in that there was a real innocence to Italian 90 and nobody kind of knew what to expect. 4 years on, playing the Italians, I don't want to say there was a big expectation, but almost the sense that Ireland had come of age and felt more comfortable at that level, that there was more sense of belonging at a World Cup. We weren't just there for the ride, that actually we should go not as an underdog, but a team that could more than match some of the best teams in the world.
Yeah, I don't think, if Ireland had lost 2 or 3-0, now the world has changed, but there would have been sort of a certain amount of criticism thrown back at the team if they had a loss that way, where when you think about that, that Italian team was full of stars of AC Milan who just won Champions League. So there was an expectancy that Ireland would go deep into the competition. For whatever reason, obviously we players playing at the highest level in England at the time. So there was an expectancy around this team, and it wasn't just we were here for the crack lads. That had moved on from sort of 88, 90. They got so deep into the competition that people were expecting big things of this squad. So there was a bit of pressure on the team at the time, if I remember correctly.
David, I said everybody over the age of 30 may have a memory of this. You're just over the age of 30. Have you any memory of it first time around?
They were actually at home in my parents' house in Cork. There actually is a photo of me in the bathroom in a 94 World Cup Ireland kit, full kit, and I'm holding a ball. But like you said, like I'd have been 5 at the time. I don't remember it. Obviously, I've seen the goal 1,000 times over the years, but I wouldn't have a memory back then of specifically that game.
It's a match and probably a performance that over the years has grown somewhat in mystique. So over the next little while, we'll try and cut through some of that and give some honest reflections on watching the game back in full last night. To give some context around the match, and it's hard to think of a game that had so much context around it, from the location of the match at the Giant Stadium in New Jersey, and the Irish and the Italians with all their history with New York, the two communities just taking over the city for the couple of days in advance. And in a way, it feels like one of those that, while there was about 40,000 Irish there, it feels like there was 250,000. And I put this out on Twitter last night to say we were going to be covering this. And I think I got 50 responses from people when I said, where did you watch it? All of whom were, I was at the stadium. It does feel that for a certain generation, and maybe we were just that little bit too young, Vinny, that if you were in your early 20s, no matter what happened in 1994, you were getting yourself to New York.
Yeah, I think it was just the wrong time, and in terms of a few years later, you'd been old enough to get yourself there. I remember, like, when you think I went to Poland that time and seeing the Euros around that time. So, yeah, it would have been a special time. Just obviously too young for it, but again, like it was just after the likes of the commitments and all of that stuff. So we'd seen all of the funny element to it, but this was a serious tournament, as I said earlier on, and people were going there with a bit of expectancy. And obviously, the Irish community in America, there was always somewhere for people to stay. You got that sense. I knew a lot of people like who went to America to experience it, fellas that sort of known. So a lot of people got over there, and there was a couple of tours where people were ripped off as such as around that time, where people got let down for tickets and that. But the World Cup back then, and I know it's still one of the biggest tournaments in the world, obviously, but back then it was the holy grail of football. And I don't think Champions League had overtaken the World Cup at that stage.
It was a stage where Sky Sports was only on the air a couple of years, so we were only getting into that rhythm of watching matches even on a weekly basis. So there was still that novelty of every match over the course of a month being live on the television and everyone just buying into it. In terms of the two teams then, we'll get on to Ireland. You mentioned that Italian squad. So exactly a month earlier, 7 of that Italian squad were part of the AC Milan squad that hammered Barcelona in the Champions League final. It was a squad that had Giuseppe Signori, who scored 50 goals in Serie A over the previous 2 seasons, and they had Roberto Baggio, who was the current World Footballer of the Year. And on top of that, they were managed by Arrigo Sacchi, who had got the Italian job by leading AC Milan to back-to-back Champions League European Cup titles, and was probably seen at that stage as the best manager in the world. Like, this was an Italian side that went into USA 94 with the chance to become one of the great international sides of all time when you look at the talent, probably in a similar position that maybe Spain went into the World Cup in 2010, that if things had gone as they should have gone for that Italian side, and they very nearly got there, we would be talking about this Italy team. And maybe that's what adds to the greatness of this Irish result as much as anything else, Vinny.
Yeah, like 4-0 to beat Barcelona. It was a proper Barcelona side at that stage. I actually grew up, I had strange likings at that stage. So Liverpool, and I remember it was 8 or 9 around 88. That would have been my favourite Liverpool team. I then moved on to AC Milan and then moved on to Real Madrid. So for some strange reason. So because maybe I was a glory hunter, I followed the great that team, that AC Milan team around the early 90s was unreal. Like, it was, you know, Donadoni, but the top class players all over the place. And we didn't see that much football. We didn't have fellas YouTubing and being gamers. That's for sure. Back then, you got a little bit of Sunday afternoon. You may have got Italian football. You sort of didn't really see Spanish football back then. So there was a bit of mystique around the players, and you only seen the top games at that stage.
The Irish team, I'll run through the starting 11 then. Packy Bonner in goals, back 4 of Dennis Irwin, Phil Babb, Paul McGrath and Terry Phelan. In midfield, 5-man midfield, Ray Houghton and Steve Staunton were on the wings, John Sheridan, Andy Townsend and Roy Keane, quite an engine in the middle. And Tommy Coyne then of Motherwell, a strong Motherwell, and the player who was scoring goals in Scottish football, very much leading the line by himself. It was, David, when you look at the age profile, there was quite a mix there. You had Houghton, who was into his 30s, obviously Paul McGrath well into his 30s and no knees at that stage at all. And you had the energy of a Phil Babb and really a Roy Keane in the middle of midfield. It was a nice mix that Jack Charlton had.
Yeah, I think it's essential that for younger lads, it's quite weird talking about, like, Roy Keane would have been, 22, 23 at the time. You look at McAteer, Phil Babb, speaking about them as young professionals, but to be able to come into a group of such experienced pros, like you said there, of Phil Babb, Andy Townsend, Packy Bonner, Joe Ray Houghton, would have shown them, the way that it works with the Irish setup. But like, looking back on the game, like, people could say it's a bit of an Irish classic of a snatch and grab, but Ireland played some really good football. They've got some really good players in that team. And I don't think it was that much of a surprise that they got a result,
Yeah, when you watch the TV analysis in advance, and there's only a short bit of it on the YouTube video, John Giles says, draw. Frank Stapleton looks like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world at that moment in time. Sort of shrugs his shoulders, says, draw as well. And Joe Kinnear, who is one of the pundits, there's no Eamon Dunphy in studio pre-match, unfortunately.
Oh, no.
Joe Kinnear goes for a 1-0 win for Ireland. So none of them are expecting Ireland, despite the talent in that Italian squad, to get battered. And then Niall Quinn is actually on co-commentary. He talks about maybe the Italians having a certain fear of Ireland, and that if Ireland go 1-0 up, that they're best in front. And he sort of called it. It certainly felt that there was a lot of confidence. And maybe that goes back to the pre-tournament from Ireland as well. They'd gone and they played warm-up games against Germany and Holland, and they'd beaten both of them. There was the three amigos. There was McAteer, Babb and Kelly. There was a real buzz around what that team could do, Vinny.
Yeah, there was. And I think to be fair, it just shows you we didn't see. I remember one comment Giles made, he basically said Baggio didn't really perform 4 years ago, and it'd be interesting to see how he does now, almost making the point that he hadn't seen him that much in the last 4 years. So again, going back to my point, you didn't see these players week in, week out. What was fascinating about the squad for me was someone like Kevin Moran was still in the squad at 38. It was an aging squad, but and Niall made a reference to he was down at training and he didn't see, Jack said, forget about tactics in Italy and we move on to crossing and finishing. But actually, when you look at the squad, the way he set up that midfield three, the way Houghton turned up inside at different stages, there was a certain amount of tactics there. I think, I know they say Jack was very, very black and white and it was very basic stuff, but they picked a very, very, like, Babb playing beside McGrath was because Alan Kernahan was the main centre half probably going into the tournament, but Babb playing beside McGrath was proper understanding who they were playing against.
That's probably one of the big differences in the last quarter of a century, is just the sheer level of analysis, both in terms of the media and I think from people within the game, David, so USA 94, you think of that performance, Ray Houghton's goal and Paul McGrath was unbelievable. And we sort of all leave it at that. And we're happy with that. And we're happy with the memories. Whereas now, every victory, and you played in some of the big victories over the last few years, like a 1-0 win isn't enough. We need to dig deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into the performance until we can pick it apart into absolutely nothing, rather than probably, again, a more innocent time where we just enjoyed it.
Yeah, definitely. Like even as we're doing this, myself and people watched the game last night, and we'll be looking at different. It's almost as if you're analysing faults. You're looking for the problems to try and solve them. Even though, like, the way Ireland set up, whether or not, look, I don't know how they performed in training. Did they work on tactics? Obviously, you're saying there, Nathan, they didn't. But they knew what they were doing. Every player to a T knew what they were doing. They were organised. They were disciplined. Anytime, like, even if you look at the ball went back to, to Packy Bonner, the whole team pushed up. Like, Houghton came in off the wing, then at times Sheridan pushed forward to join Tommy Coyne. They knew what they were doing. So it's almost like they must have done some tactical work or must have had conversations. It can't be just down to, well, we're going to go long, somebody join in, like, oh, well, he's gone, I'll wait, I'll go the next time. They had to have done it. And it probably is a fault that we have now, is we're looking at games and we're trying to overanalyze everything that we're looking at. Well, he could have passed it here, he could have passed it there, his positioning's wrong. There would have been, like, even looking back at the game, there's times, there's so many different faults where players could have played forward, but they decided to go back, etc., etc. But on the overall basis of the 90-minute performance, they did everything perfectly. And that's why, like, if you look at it and you watch it back now, they deserved to win that game. They had great chances to even go 2-0.
I find it really interesting because, especially being in the middle of the game at the moment in terms of coaching, that everything is overanalyzed. So for example, Irwin, who, you know, people talk about Dennis Irwin and, you know, ex-players, and I even heard Danny Higginbotham during the week speak about him, and, you know, how he was the best he's ever seen other than Cole and different bits and pieces. But Irwin kicked the ball back to them, particularly early in the game. So many and misplaced passes. And if that game was taking place in the modern world, you would have Twitter gone absolutely bananas at him 2 minutes into the game, kicking the ball away, going over the end line. And it is overanalyzed now. We don't tend to just sit back and enjoy games. And or there might have been a gift created about Irwin kicking the ball out of play, you know, within 5 minutes of the start. So it does show you that we've gone to the stage where we're probably not actually enjoying games anymore. We're sitting there, you know, on social media. I'm not talking about myself. I'm talking about the world. It's gone so much. It's overanalyzing every single pass and not just enjoying the game.
So let's get into some analysis of the game and the quality of that performance, because in some ways it was peak Jack, in that, like, you look at 10 seconds in was almost a carbon copy of the goal that eventually came. It was just a long hoof forward by Dennis Irwin. Italians headed out. It falls to Steve Staunton, who hits it first time on the volley. And if that goes in top corner, it's one of the greatest goals we've ever seen. But that was a large part of the game plan, which was get it long and win second balls, which ultimately results 10 minutes into the game in Ray Houghton's goal. But as David touched on there, like, there were moments as well where Ireland tried to get it down and play a bit of football and did quite well, and maybe should have done it more often. Like, David, you would have grown up hearing the stories of Jack Charlton and agricultural football. Like, was it what you expected from that Ireland team, the style of football they played with?
Yes and no. You can see at times the midfielders pick up the ball and they kind of bypass the back four and go straight back to Packy. And then, like, even at times the centre-halves have it. You think, well, you can stand on the ball. You've got time. You know what I mean? These are decent players that you can actually play a bit. But they do choose to go back to them and get forward. Like, you hear George Hamilton in commentary talking about the heat, obviously the occasion, the atmosphere. Do you know what I mean? It's the first game in a World Cup. And, you know, the first thing you think was, don't get beat. We can't lose this. We can get something out of the game. And they got success. Like, you know, obviously you asked us to have a look at it. Any unsung heroes? You look at the work Tommy Coyne did up front on his own is phenomenal. Like Vinny touched on that great AC Milan team. You look at, you know, the back four, the AC Milan back four, and he caused them all sorts of problems. And this is a lad playing with Motherwell, you know what I mean, who are nowhere near AC Milan's level. But Jack, look, it was a bit of long football, yeah. But look, it worked. Don't fix it if it isn't broke.
Yeah, it did work at times. And, like, we talk about maybe Ireland, and clearly they did some tactical practice during the week, Vinny, but we don't have quite as many camera angles back then as we do now either. But a couple of occasions when the ball was at Packy Bonner's feet, they went to the Italian defence and they looked totally confused. They knew he was going to come with the long ball, and one or two of them were stepping up, one or two were stepping back. They didn't seem prepared, bizarrely, for what Ireland were going to throw at them. Yeah,
I think what that done was, and we'll move on to the goal maybe later on, but what it done was create the mindset with the Italians that this is coming long. It's coming long, and the Italians were heading balls out just outside the box, edge of the box, all of that stuff. So they were dropping deep. And, you know, you look at, maybe it doesn't suit you after dinner speaking, but there's no way there wasn't. I accept they had so many good players. So you put so many good players together in a team, Ireland, that basically they'll come up with a shape and a way to play. But that midfield three, that combination of that midfield three of Sheridan, Townsend and Keane was actually brilliant on the day. It was perfect. It was the right balance. And if one went forward, you'd want to sit. Sheridan actually surprised me watching the game back how comfortable he was on the football, and he was excellent at passing, and his pass, you know, just the simple passes and the basic stuff. So there was definitely a way of playing Ireland had, and what it did was, and again, maybe it goes back to the point that people weren't over-analysing each other and there wasn't as many camera angles. The Italians dropped that deep that they didn't. They allowed Ireland a little bit of freedom to play. So it probably helped them, the mindset of the Italians.
John Sheridan is an interesting player. So he starts that game and obviously hits the crossbar in the second half as well. And again, he's the sort of player he would say is not a Jack Charlton midfielder, because he wasn't somebody who really got up and down the pitch and around and got massively stuck in. Like, that was sort of left to Townsend and to Keane. He was just a lovely footballer.
Yeah, I think he was underrated. I remember Sheffield Wednesday at the time, the FA Cup was a real special thing, and so he was around Sheffield Wednesday around that time. But yeah, I probably, again, wouldn't have remembered the game as well as, because I was so young or so long ago. But he was a really tidy footballer. And again, Jack obviously thought about that. There was going to be moments where we've got to keep the ball in this heat. And again, he was involved for the goal. He went and got it off a fullback. I just thought, for me, I thought he was everything that you would think against Jack. I mean, you go back to someone like Ronnie Whelan for many years before that was an outstanding footballer in the great Liverpool team. And he struggled to play with Jack because the ball was sailing over his head. And then we have one of the biggest games in Irish football history, and John Sheridan is walking around passing the ball 5 and 6 yards and getting it off fullback. So it is a contradiction, and it makes you wonder, do you remember the way you should, or the way it actually happened?
Talk about Roy Keane's performance, David, because he was only a young man at that stage, in his early 20s, first World Cup. I think probably a very different personality as well to Roy Keane. He'd admit himself back in 1994 to the one that had all the issues in 2002 and later on in his career. From what you remember of Keane, say, in those sort of 2000 to 2006 at Manchester United, how did that performance for Ireland fit in with what you remember from him?
He just has the knack of being in the right place at the right time. Whether the balls, when Packy was knocking them long, they were falling into midfield, he was just always there. At the start of the game, there was a little bit of confusion. Roberto Baggio was coming deep, but then even they take on the responsibility between him and McGrath to sort it out. But he just, every second ball that was falling, he was there. He was tackling, kept it simple. Like you see late on into the second half, he kind of is the driving force of getting Ireland up the pitch, carrying the ball forward, simple passing. It was a remarkable performance, not only from him, but do you know what I mean? The 13 of them that played. I know, but it's just, he did a lot of hard work it doesn't get seen. And I think like the players on that pitch would appreciate that more, because they'll have understood. And obviously people like myself and Vinny, who, have been in football a long time, we see it. It's the general public don't at times, doing the hard yards, the running, the closing down. But it was an incredible performance.
I didn't think a Cork man was going to criticise Roy, so I knew that was going to be fairly straight. No, he's right though. It was like, from what everyone remembers of Roy and what you hear, you were probably expecting, watching the game, a different type of performance. Does that make sense? Like, people talk about how good he was passing. He went back to Packy Bonner quite a lot, but for the team on the day, his as you say, he was excellent. He'd done exactly what was needed to do. But it was a very different type of performance. And also, you didn't see him really barking at anyone. That's what I found interesting, because he was probably a young pro with a lot of senior people around him. So he wasn't as the Roy, the leader in that sense, as in vocally. That was very noticeable for me.
Well, also, what a huge occasion for him. Okay, he's won a Premier League title at that stage with Manchester United, but he's gone up against Donadoni, Baggio and Albertini in that Italian midfield, and he's more than able to hold his own. It is interesting because it's sort of sacrilege to criticise either Dennis Irwin or Roy Keane, but I have it in my notes, something that you point as well, and this is what we guess we don't know when it comes to the tactical side. Did Ireland play a bit more football than we expected because of the power of Keane's personality and forcing players to give him the ball in certain areas of the pitch, and there were times where McGrath was playing it out? Or actually, should they have done more? Because I did notice Irwin was probably the one player who turned back to Bonner more often than most. And there was one occasion during the second half, one of Ireland's best little spells, where Keane plays a 1-2 with Townsend. Townsend gives it to Keane, and then Keane just dinks it over a midfielder back to Townsend. They're playing nice football in and around the halfway line, and it comes out to Irwin, and you think there's a nice ball up the right wing, or keep going forward, because you always think back to Rio Ferdinand's comment when he arrived at Manchester United, and he plays it sideways to Gary Neville, and Roy Keane turns to him and goes, "This is Manchester United. You play the ball forward." Irwin gives it back to the goalkeeper. Is that just good game management, or are we being too kind on them there?
I don't know. I struggled with it, to be honest with you. And I struggled. I was saying to myself, if I criticise people like Dennis Irwin and Roy Keane, will I be thrown out of the country over the next couple of days? So
I'd throw you up myself. The two good Cork men there.
It's funny because maybe Dennis ended up losing his place as the tournament went on to young Gary Kelly, who was young at the time, 19. So I don't know whether it was a tactical or... so it is hard to know. I would imagine that it's such a big game, and I've never heard him speaking about it, but I imagine it was like what Roy Keane became after this tournament was obviously huge, one of the best players, midfielders of all time, in my opinion, not just in England. So what he became, maybe this was like where, and it'd be interesting to ask him, and he may not admit to it, the type of person he is, but he went up against the greats at 22, and he certainly held his own. So maybe he was part of his development as a footballer, to be able to say, you know, I'm here, I'm at the world stage. And he probably came away from that tournament, actually, even though Ireland didn't do that well in it, with a lot more confidence going back to Manchester United, because again, he was finding his feet at United at that stage with the likes of Robson and in that midfield and different people. So it's interesting. I don't think he was the best player on the pitch by any shape or form. Thought Irwin made a lot of bad decisions, but again, we don't know whether they were led from a tactical point of view from the manager.
That for me, David, is the one big struggle from this game, was almost the performance of those two players. Like, were they very much sticking to the game plan? Were they using their experience, even Roy at a young age, of playing in big matches in Champions League games and knowing a sort of game management that other players didn't? Or actually, should they have taken a few more risks? Should they actually have got on the ball a bit more and tried to do the right thing a bit more often?
The easiest thing to say, obviously, is, you know, to get on the ball more and play more and whatever. They obviously, like Vinny said, they must have had a game plan. They must have had instructions of, can we get the ball back to Paki and get the team up to the halfway line? Can we try and play in the Italian half? It must have been something along those lines, because there's even times as the ball falls in the first half and it's bouncing around and Roy Keane hooks it back to Paki, and you're thinking, like, you could nearly try and turn and hook it up the pitch, but he goes back to Paki and then he just turns and for a man, like you said, after that tournament, yes, he probably went and kicked on as a midfielder, but at times they chose to go back to him. It was almost as if in doubt, we're against a great side with great players, just give it back to the keeper and we get up the pitch. Paki smash it down on top of Tommy Coyne and we play from there. It almost felt like that. Even with Dennis, I know you're saying he'd been at Man United, so like to think like he's not going to be, that wouldn't have been accepted at Man United. It wouldn't have been a case that he would have taken that from his club form into international just to do it. It must have been some instruction along the line. You got to think as well, a fullback, he'd have been on the side of, you know, Jack at times, and he might have been shouting, just give it back to Paki and get us up the pitch. Don't take any risks.
We will get on to Paul McGrath's performance. I fear if we start talking about Paul McGrath, we'll be here for half an hour just talking about Paul McGrath. There's a couple of other things I want to touch on. Like David mentioned, Ireland's chances, and had far more chances in the game really than the Italians. Even as the Italians grew in the second half, there was Sheridan hitting the crossbar. Andy Townsend had a big chance where Houghton could have scored a second just before he was taken off. And really, aside from that Pepe Signori chance that Paki Bonner saved, there weren't too many other clear-cut opportunities for the Italians. On the Italian performance then, considering the way we talked them up and all that those players had achieved, Vinny, did they underperform? Did they just not get what Ireland were trying to do individually? Were they poor?
I liked the front two. I know it didn't work for them on the day, but I can see like that front two would scare you. I definitely think... you know, how do people go from that era into the modern era? I think Baggio would be exceptional in the modern era. I really do. And I don't think he had his best game, don't get me wrong, but I think he'd be exceptional. His touch coming off striker, that sort of number 10 position in the modern game. But it just felt, I think world football changed over the next couple of years. So if you go on to 96 or you think of the 98 in France, there was no pace in the Italian team. Full of exceptional footballers, but no pace. No one that was going to... neither of the fullbacks never really got beyond anywhere. And you think of the modern game, you just can't do that. And so they were good footballers, but they actually were the perfect team for Ireland in the sense of there was no pace. And I think the fitness levels of both teams would concern me. You hear the old stories of going for points and before games and stuff like that. And I think both teams, and I accept it.
It was 34 degrees, Vinny.
Yeah, except the heat was there, right? It was exceptional heat. But the modern athlete, like the game has changed now, where the modern athlete would cope with that to a point. But there was no pace in the Italian team, so therefore Ireland, like someone like Dennis Irwin, was never going to be done because he wasn't going to get done by someone being cleverer than him. So his defending was excellent in his positional sense. Like the feeling and Irwin got so narrow when the Italians had any sort of good possession that they must have worked on that. They must have. The back four got so tight that and they weren't. Donadoni wasn't someone who's going to run and outdo you. The only time he done anybody was when it got to the end line. Staunton looked really tired. So I just thought that's the Italians were just slow. Yes, technically really good footballers. The only time they really you put real pace into it was when Dino Baggio started the second half, went on a couple of really powerful runs. Again, he was one of the younger players, and
the younger of the Baggio brothers, not related.
Yeah, I think he was 22, 23 at the time. So he was one that ejected real pace into the game, and you're like, all right, because again, you're trying to remember the game. Is this where the Italians took over? But then again, as you said, no chances created. The game slowed down again, and it suited Ireland.
We saw some glimmers of Italian brilliance and what we might remember from them, David. There was one stage in the first half where Baresi picks the ball up 1-2 and sort of finds himself up near the edge of the Irish penalty area. You think that's the Franco Baresi that you remember. Like Maldini got nailed by Roy Keane after about 6 minutes and never really impacted the game massively. What did you make of Baggio's performance? Because he was obviously playing in that number 10 role and he was dropping deeper and deeper at times. Like, I was thinking if Dunphy was on analysis, there would be the words lack of moral courage would have come up around Baggio, that here's a guy who was the World Footballer of the Year, sort of taking the easy option at times.
Yeah, I think I played holding midfielder. I played midfielder. I think the biggest problem you'll have as a midfielder when you're playing against a 10 is they come in between your line and the defensive line. But the problem Baggio was going deeper and deeper, as you said. He inevitably was getting the ball in positions where he couldn't hurt you. He wasn't getting on the half turn, like driving at the back four. He was getting turned and he was at the midfield. It was almost as if, he was getting that frustrated because Ireland's defensive line was good. They were solid. They were hard to break down. Like his performance was poor. Now I know he goes on and he lights up the rest of the tournament, but in that, game, it was almost as if I think the Italian side were waiting for him to light the game up and it wasn't happening for him.
But do you feel, David, he didn't have a runner? He never had any runners to go in that position.
I completely agree with you that that's probably the biggest thing you've noticed was the lack of pace in the Italian side. It was all nice. We'll play. Even I think it's the first opening clip where the ball breaks down the left and they're just like touching around. There's a couple of nice, but it's all in front of Ireland. There's nothing, like you said, going in behind, because if they had runners going behind, then that the back four is going to drop off, and that's when Baggio would have come alive. But it was just like even there, Nathan. You were talking about Baresi. Like I know how good Baresi is. I've seen the YouTube clips, which are a lie in a way because people can throw together clips of all his best moments. But at times he was coming out with the ball, and it was just he was clipping it down the left, clipping it down the right, and they were just going nowhere. He was clipping straight to Irish players. He was clipping them out for throw-ins, goal kicks. He was giving away the ball the whole time, and you're thinking, set yourself down. I think the Italian performance was, I think Ireland caused them problems, but I think the Italians were poor. I think, if the way they played in that game, they were there for the taking, and Ireland deserved it.
This is the Classic Game Club on Off the Ball. We are looking back on the Republic of Ireland's 1-0 win over Italy at USA 94. I'm joined by the Dundalk manager, Vinny Perth, and the former Ireland international, David Meyler. Let's talk Paul McGrath then, because this is often put up there as arguably the greatest individual performance any Irish player has ever put in at a major tournament. Agree or disagree, Vinny?
Oh, I don't know.
Get off that fence.
I wouldn't have put it that highly. Like, at a major tournament, it's different, I suppose, because we haven't had so many big wins at major tournaments. Particularly the first 20 minutes, he looked like he struggled in the heat. He looked like blowing hard. It looked like it took him a while. He was 34 at the stage, and we all know it's well documented that, you know, he had struggles around different stages. So you just wonder how much peak fitness he was in going into the game. He needed Phil Babb beside him. Phil Babb's pace was outstanding. He kicked the ball away quite a lot. David was speaking about Baresi. I thought the two of them started the game very similar, two absolute icons of world football, and both of them started the game similar, where they kicked the ball away. There was, so unlike Paul McGrath, there was one half volley where he just launched it into the other side of the pitch. But then with the great players like him, when the game sort of settled down and he needed to do certain things, he was there. His blocks, his headers, all of that stuff. He showed great leadership. For me, it wasn't the performance that I've read about or that I remember watching the game back. I don't know whether that's a coaching head on me or that's overanalyzing it, but he wasn't as good as people would have you believe, in my opinion. I actually think Phil Babb played better than him on the day. And if you were, obviously you wouldn't scout it to them because you have a 34-year-old and a young Phil Babb. But at that stage, you could see Phil Babb had the potential of, you know, playing in Italy, for argument's sake. I'm sure people in Italy watching that game would go, this Babb player could be a player for us. So, interesting. The Paul McGrath one, I'll leave that. I'll send it back to you to debate that.
Well, you're already banned from Cork, and now you're banned from pretty much all of Ireland at this stage after, I won't say criticising Paul McGrath, but it has been built up to such an extent. And to be honest, I would agree largely. I guess the context maybe is everything with this, that McGrath's 34, both his knees is gone. It's like there's such a backstory. Even a few weeks before the tournament, he's not expected to be there, proves his fitness in one of the warm-up games, and then up against the Footballer of the Year, Roberto Baggio. And it probably is that moment in 20 minutes where he wins the two headers and he gets the block in on Baggio that stands out. And right up to the last minute, he's still there winning tackles. That this is a player who should have really been, at that stage, David, overrun by a player of Roberto Baggio's quality or Signori's quality, but actually was more than able to hold his own.
Yeah, no, I think I'd agree with Vinny. Like, he needed Phil Babb alongside him. I think Phil Babb's performance was incredible. I might be wrong, but he'd have been 22, 23. He was at Coventry at the time. It was his sixth cap. The thing to come into that game would have been an unbelievable experience for him, playing alongside Paul McGrath, who I imagine would have coached him through the game and helped him and settled him right down. But the opening 10 or 15 minutes, it's fair to say Paul is a bit all over the place. Like, he's just lashing balls everywhere. Yeah, the occasion, the heat, everything. But maybe is it because of what you're saying there, Nathan, that, you know, he's on the way out, his knees aren't great, he's struggling for fitness, and then he's right into this. And as you said, he's against the World Player of the Year, but it just shows the type of player he was. He was able to read the game. He's in the right positions, making blocks, making tackles. Like, it is an incredible performance. Like, you asked the question, is it the best ever performance of an Irish player? I don't know, because I've not watched 88, 90, do you know what I mean? Even 02. It's hard. You know, it's hard for me to say because I've not watched all the games. I'm too young.
I think Duff against Spain is still the best performance of anyone in Irish jersey at a major tournament for me. But that's maybe me showing my age, and you might find people a little bit older than me would say, no, McGrath outstrips that.
It is the watching it back a quarter of a century later, and it is, I suppose, the love for Paul McGrath has just grown and grown. And like, I think back to, did you play in Robbie Keane's final game, David, when Paul McGrath's face came up on the big screen at the Aviva Stadium and the whole stadium gets to their feet? Like, he's probably the most beloved sports person this country has, and also because he was seen as a very un-Irish type of footballer, that he was such a cultured footballer. Maybe that's what's most jarring of this, is that it was a sort of backs to the wall McGrath job. He was winning tackles. He just put his body everywhere. Whereas what you would think was actually McGrath stroking the ball around at the back. When it come to him, he'd take it down, chested, sort of Virgil van Dijk-esque. Whereas this wasn't really that type of performance from McGrath.
Yeah, that's probably it. You know, like in the clips that I've seen of Paul McGrath over the years, like you said, he's such a culture defender. Like even if you look at after Paul, the centre halves that I played for Ireland, we've never had someone of that stature to be able to bring it down. And then when you watch this game, it's a bit frantic at the start, but then as it settles down, like I had to retire through my knee, but like if he had 2 dodgy knees, then you just think like it's incredible to go and play in Giant Stadium against Italy, you know, the first game of World Cup or whatever. It's just remarkable to put in a performance like that, albeit, yeah, like we spoke earlier on about criticising. I imagine if you actually sat down and watched it, you know, with the iPad and you were able to go through things, you'd probably pick out a lot of faults. But look, nowadays the popular thing is to be negative. People just, like Vinny said, they want to get on Twitter and say, have you seen your man do this? Have you seen your man do that? That's the first thing that comes to people's minds.
I think George Hamilton helps him as well. Like every time he does anything, it's like, wow, McGrath. Some of the commentators help you. And again, yeah, look, it was a brilliant performance by him, and it was really good. But again, he's so helped by his team. Like Ireland didn't play 4-4-2, and most teams were playing 4-4-2 at that stage. The midfield three definitely helped. You could tell at some stage him and Roy Keane sort of got together in terms of Baggio dropping in, and that helped him a huge amount. So, but it was a brilliant performance, and I think we need to be careful we don't take too much away from it.
Yeah.
Poor old George Hamilton had a tough time of it. But firstly, they went to him about 10 minutes before the game even started. Whereas nowadays, with the TV coverage, it's keep on the pundits for as long as possible until right before kickoff. The players were 10 minutes away from even going on the pitch, and they had gone over to George Hamilton and Niall Quinn. Then he did that little thing that all commentators like to do, have a bitch and a moan. They need no monitor to see what was actually happening, so he was just going to have to, no replays, much to his frustration. But he got there and he nailed the big moment. We haven't touched on Ray Houghton's goal. What a finish.
It's an incredible finish. But you gotta think, where's the keeper? Like if you're like, I'm doing it now, I'm being negative, but like, why is the keeper so far off his line? Like there's no, like it's a clean enough strike, but like there's no real power on it. If you watch it, it's more of a, like he catches it, but it's lofted over him. Like Pagliuca is way out of his goal. Like I don't see that going in nowadays. Like, but hey, that's just me being negative.
Yeah, the goal is an interesting one for me. Just before they scored, actually, Signori had a chance, I think, but just before that, Tommy Coyne had got a chance from a long ball and a header down into that area. And then someone we haven't really mentioned is Packy Bonner's distribution, and he looks so experienced in the game. And I know when I say his distribution, I'm not talking about the big GAA punt straight up into the pitch, but he was clever in his distribution. But if you watch the goal, when he gets the ball into his hands, the Italian defence just dropped back so deep. He actually throws it to Irwin, one of the only times, and it just shows you how the game has changed, because Italy in any goal kick never went short once, which is if you think of the way the game has gone now, everything is 2 players standing inside the box. So Italy never went short once, which is remarkable to think about it. And then Bonner throws a short to Irwin. John Sheridan comes and gets it off and clips it, and the Italians are heading it from a goal kick inside their own box, and then it's a poor header by Baresi. And as David spoke about, Houghton, it was obviously something he worked on. Houghton ends up in that little position, and yeah, you would have to question the goalkeeper. There's no doubt about it. But brilliant goal, and it just shows you that tactically Ireland's tactics, and that's where, you know, they got into the mindset of the Italians. They just dropped off and created a little bit of space to allow the goal happen. So that's where, from a coach's point of view, I can see the sort of sequence of why that happened and how Ireland's style of play created a goal.
And as George Hamilton touched on, like Ray Houghton was really fighting for his place in the team at that stage. Jason McAteer was the coming player, so it was another big moment. Like, we'll talk Ray Houghton again, I'm sure, but what from 1988, which we touched on a recent Classic Game Club, of being part of that Liverpool side, the emotional roller coaster his career went on over the next 6 years for club and country is probably unmatched. I want to get into some of the categories then and run through some of these that we have every time on the Classic Game Club. The secret man of the match. We say secret man of the match because I assume Paul McGrath is the obvious man of the match for an awful lot of people in this. Vinny, who was the player that stood out for you?
again, we haven't mentioned him, but I thought how the speed of Terry Phelan was amazing. Just like he was just like a Duracell bunny. He was ahead of his time, and in the sense of most players weren't as fit as him, so the heat didn't seem to affect him in any way, shape, or form. But for me, Phil Babb was probably the best player on the pitch on the day, in my opinion. I thought he was perfect. Everything Ireland needed. He was man of the match for me. He's who I'd have given it to.
Yeah, what was it about Babb's performance? What was he doing?
Best compliment I'd give him is he probably looked Italian, and if that makes sense back then, he was assured, he was calm, his pace, he knew when to go in after somebody, when not to. Never got done in behind, and that was a big thing for them. I just felt he just looked calm, he looked composed for such a young player. He just went to, I would say he went to the wrong club at the time. When he went to that Liverpool team, it was all around, they were just the wrong team. They nearly broke through, and it was a little bit, the white suits probably sum up that whole Liverpool team that came after the next few years. If he had went, and maybe it's rose tinted glasses, I don't know, but if he had went to an Italian club, or he may have become an even better player. But he just looked, for want of a better word, he looked Italian on the day.
David, who's your secret man of the match?
I agree with Vinny, with Phil Babb, but I suppose I have to give a special mention. I think it's Tommy Coyne. Like, Ireland were the 4-5-1. To lead that line on your own is very difficult. Do you know what I mean? And I spoke about the AC Milan back four, incredible players, Baresi, Maldini, and it's almost that he relished the challenge. He fought for every ball. I'd say he won 60-70% of them. Like, it's very impossible. Like, it's impossible to win every ball, but he fought, he chased down things. He made a nuisance of himself, and he linked up the play. And I think because his name wasn't as big as the others, it probably gets overshadowed. But I think it was an incredible performance from him.
Yeah, and that was a difficult position as well. It was the one area of the pitch where maybe Ireland were struggling. So, like, Frank Stapleton's day had come and gone. He's sat in studio. Niall Quinn gets injured in one of the warm-up games. He finds himself on co-commentary. John Aldridge is 35 at this stage. Tony Cascarino's into his 30s. David Kelly's probably not quite at the level. It's that gap between Stapleton and Robbie Keane, with Niall Quinn up in there and Aldridge. It was a real problem area, I'd imagine, Vinny, in the lead-up. Even though Tommy Coyne played well in the warm-up games, I'd say it was a big issue for Jack Charlton.
Yeah, Bernie Slavin was actually in the squad as well, I think, wasn't he, around that time? So they had a shortage of quality. Again, David's spot on with that one, because my perception of was like Tommy Coyne, when I actually forgot he started as such until I started watching the game back. And my perception was that he wasn't as, we were going to struggle. Thought he was excellent on the day. His work rate was phenomenal. Not just his work rate, but he was clever in terms of his runs and when to link up. And him and Andy Townsend. Andy Townsend was generally the one that played closest to him, or broke at least. He had a good combination. It was a real problem position for us, but and particularly it's probably one of the reasons why we didn't go as long in that game, because he certainly wasn't the biggest man. Yeah, if Niall Quinn had been fit, maybe he would have started, and we probably would have went a little bit more direct to him. And but no, that's a great shout by David. He was excellent. Changed my opinion of him a little bit watching the game back, because I thought he looked really, really good. And remember, there was only two substitutes at the time. Interesting, and I forgot about that. But from to run that distance in that position for 89 minutes, and he was still at it right at the end. He was exceptional on the day.
Yeah, the subs. McAteer played very well when he came on as well, in place of Ray Houghton for the last 20 minutes or so. In terms of moment of the match, the Roy's double tackle very early on, but it's hard to get away from the goal. Has anyone got anything that's not the goal?
I've obviously watching it down. You write down some things. I think Phil Babb makes a tackle that I've seen given as penalties. And you can immediately goes to commentary, like in George, no penalty, and Niall is like, great tackle from Phil Babb. Like, of course, like the Irish say that, but you've seen them given. It's the way he comes across him. That could have been a total different moment where, like, Italy get a penalty, Baggio probably would step up and score. Dennis Irwin has another great tackle. Like those kind of key moments that, you know, the Italians are obviously applying good pressure, that they're trying to find a way back into it. But they just had no like answers for Ireland.
Anything from you, Vinny?
No, I suppose from the goal along, it was a duller game than I remember, to be fair. I thought though, and that combination for someone like me, a bit like David played in midfield, when Roy Keane got to the end line, pulls it back, the step over by Tommy Coyne, and Sheridan should probably score, but it was brilliant play from that midfield three, and it summed it up, because at that stage Townsend ends up sitting and the other two lads get forward. I thought, and that summed up how good that midfield three were on the day for me. Brilliant play, and at that stage, even though he hits the crossbar, probably gives you as a player another shot in the arm that we can go and get the second, and we're not just hanging on for dear life.
Yeah, it was almost reminiscent of the goal Robbie Keane scored in Paris the night of the Thierry Henry handball, with the way they worked it down the left-hand side. And obviously Robbie had the finish that night. Trends of the era, like, it's easy to look back and watch and say some terrible haircuts, but I do remember my 12-year-old self really wanting highlights in my hair like Andy Townsend. Vinny, don't lie. Don't lie, Vinny. You probably had them.
Andy Townsend actually was, around that stage, was one of my heroes, yeah. So I loved him. I never had the highlights. I had the sort of the split hair and curly down the sides, all of that stuff. But what about the boots? What about the boots? Like the all black, nearly all the Adoras, everyone wearing black boots. Ray Houghton was walking out with the cap on.
And
Staunton.
Someone had a pop off him, it looked like, or a joke. And then by the time they lined up, he got rid of the hat. So he obviously got a little bit of stick off one of the Italian players. Staunton there with the hat, that's just crazy stuff. I've never seen nothing like it. So, and Mick Bourne, the physio. Like, imagine trying to get away with that nowadays, you know. Mick Bourne running on with the bottle of water. Interesting days they were. They were different to the modern footballer, that's for sure.
Yeah, was it Italian mind games, I wondered, before the match, where Ireland came out, obviously with Steve Staunton with the hat, in their jerseys, and the Italians in the 34 degrees heat have got their tracksuit tops on. Mind games, David?
I wouldn't say mind games. I think that's just a poor call from a kit man to say, like, you know, put on your anthem jackets. Like as Vinny said there, I couldn't believe it, you know, when obviously you sent us through things to have a look out for. I just see Ray Houghton walking on with this flat white cap on and Staunton behind him. And then once the final whistle goes and the camera goes to Jack's got the same hat on as well. Like, it's just mind blowing, some of the stuff you're watching. Like, you just can't believe it. Like,
and there's no even advertisement on the hat, so someone hasn't even thought of that. Like, you know what I mean? How the game ends now, that would have a brand name on it now.
Yeah.
Which was surprising, because that was really the World Cup where the memorabilia was huge. You see the plastic green hands that I think absolutely everybody had. And obviously it was in the USA, so they were all about the marketing side of it. So yeah, it was definitely a missed opportunity. Jarring, anything that particularly jarred when you watched it back? Like, watching it back, something that jarred was just how good looking Paolo Maldini was. Dear God. There's a man who was at the peak of his powers in many ways, I suspect.
I don't think I picked up on how good looking Paolo Maldini was. I'm sure Paolo looks the same now, and that's like 25 years ago. So what? I think how old is he there? He's probably 19, 20, 21?
Yeah, a bit older than that. Yeah, is he 24, 25 at that stage?
Is he that old?
You don't have his jersey on the back wall, no.
No.
You didn't get
friend, I'm pulling all sorts of favours out, Finny. Somebody's promised me that they'll get me a Paolo Maldini signed top, so
fair enough.
Fingers crossed.
It's amazing though, the size of the jerseys on the lads. Like, they actually looked almost unfit, in the sense of, because the jerseys are so big on them, they all look like they were carrying a few pounds. Particularly the Ireland jersey. I mean, there was one picture of Ray Houghton, and there's the sleeve is down here. Like, they just looked uncomfortable on them. There was certainly nothing fitted about the jerseys, and probably added to with the heat and the temperature there, having to wear a jersey like that would have crucified them, you know. So, I suppose it was so long ago, but just different style. The footballers all wearing black boots, as I said, that was remarkable, and everybody looked like they needed a haircut. Like, everybody, you know. You think of it now, I'm sure if that World Cup happened now, you'd have a hairdresser coming in to treat the lads before games. Like, everybody looked like they needed a good haircut. Maybe that was the fashion back then. I can't remember.
And terrible national anthems. Dear God. Like, the Italian national anthems, one of the great national anthems, and both that and Our Own Naveen were these slow dirge, like, oh my God. It was the most depressing start to a match I've ever seen. For sliding doors then, if something had gone one way or another way, like you mentioned maybe the Phil Babb tackle on Dino Baggio, if there was VAR back then, maybe it's a penalty kick and it's a totally different result. It's hard to think because it was such a perfect day of what could have been different. Maybe it's what happens afterwards, and like, did we all lose the run of ourselves? Like, did the players? It was interesting, like Niall Quinn on co-commentary is obviously so close to the current squad still that he's down in the dressing room pre-match. Like, that's how involved he is. And when he's talking to George Hamilton after the match, all that's in Niall Quinn's mind is party. Party, party. There's no real talk of Mexico or Norway. It's like, that's a few days away. We'll worry about that, but we got to enjoy this. And even during that, like, Niall Quinn at one stage talks about perhaps Ireland now are one of the favourites for the tournament after beating the Italians. And maybe, again, talk about the quality of that Italian side. Maybe they were right. It just feels that maybe the underdog status suited us a little bit, and that the second we got a bit of confidence, we all lost the run of ourselves.
Yeah, it's probably, for me, the underlying, again, maybe it's a coach's hat on me, is thinking, did the players look after themselves in that tournament? Did they really have a real go? Did someone like, would Roy Keane allow that at 26, 4 years later, would he allow that? And ultimately he didn't allow that, or he didn't want that to happen, going back, when he lost his head over preparations. It looked like, as good as they were, it looked like they didn't prepare properly. It looked like there wasn't that sort of enough professionalism around the team at that time. Because, again, as you said, Noel, they've spoken openly about points before the Italian game, points before the Norwegian game. And in that heat, it didn't look like they had a right cut off it, and it didn't look like they sensed that was the opportunity, because this squad was a very aging squad, and therefore you can see why Kelly came into the team. You can see why Jason McAteer came into the team, Phil Babb. Probably needed that ultimate level of professionalism for them to get to the next stage, or to go beyond where they got. So just felt they missed the trick. And maybe that's, looking back now, it's easy to look back now and say, because we know now what we know, how much you need to be looking after yourselves before these big games.
And the heat, there's no question. Like, I was talking about the match last night with my wife and my mother-in-law, both of whom, it turns out, were at the match and having a very good time. And the first thing when I mentioned it was, oh my God, it was the hottest day I ever remember. That strength and conditioning, David, clearly wasn't 25 years ago where it is now, but that maybe Ireland made a bit too much of it. And because of the fact that all these players talk about these couple of weeks as some of the best of their life, for many reasons, that the level of professionalism that was needed, if they'd had that, could have taken them to another level.
Yeah, but back then the culture was to have a few pints before the game, and then I imagine they had a bucket load after the game, especially after beating Italy. That's just the way it was. Like, you're talking about strength and conditioning, you could talk about nutrition, even probably warm downs, like all that stuff was probably never happened. Like, you couldn't, like, I'd imagine even when I played, yeah, you were allowed 2 or 3 pints after a game, but the following morning you'd be down for breakfast, you'd be in a swimming pool, you'd be out, like the lads who didn't play would be out training. I imagine none of that happened back then. So it's just probably the way it was. And like, the Italians are renowned for, a glass of wine. Even the day of a game, they could, like, they're allowed to have a glass of wine.
A glass, though.
Yeah, a glass. Yeah, I don't think the Irish lads would be having a glass of wine, like, but it's just, look, it's with times. I believe everyone gives great praise to Arsene Wenger for changing kind of the way he tried to change the Premier League and making it more professional. If Ireland had that, who knows? Do you know what I mean? They have a great mix in that squad of youth and experience, a good blend of exciting players. Who knows what could have happened?
So to finish up then, this performance, Ireland 1, Italy 0. Vinny, overrated or underrated?
Oh no, it is probably It was at the time it was a remarkable performance. The reason why I bring up, say, strength and conditioning and things like that, and how people played, is that you're now looking back on it from, what was it, 26 years ago. So you're looking back as it with a different mindset. But at the time, we're beating, what a magical team of players we beat. So at the time, it deserved all the credit it got. Just the sort of modern day coaching that you're wondering, could they have gone any further? So it deserves to be where it's held. Like the McGrath performance deserves to be where it is. I just think the game changed a couple of years later, and by '98, there was pace in the game and there was real professionalism in the game by '98. So it was right. It was at that change of the game. So therefore, I would have question marks over some of it. That's all.
Yeah, and I think what happened afterwards with the following 3 games where Ireland underperformed could change your opinion, and the Italians obviously recover from this. They get all the way to a World Cup final, and only for Roberto Baggio in the penalty shootout could well have been the world champions. And maybe we do talk about them as one of the greatest international teams of all time. As a one-off performance, David, underrated or overrated?
I won't say it's overrated. Underrated. Like you said, looking at a wonderful Italian team. An Ireland team, like I said, that has young, exciting players coming through, a lot of players who are at the end of their international careers, and to go opening game of a World Cup, beat Italy, who are one of the favourites, incredible. The performance from start to finish, like, I don't care if I spoke to Jack Charlton, Dennis Irwin, Roy Keane, if they told me they didn't do any tactical work, they must have done something, because to achieve, every player knew what they were doing. They got their game plan spot on. They frustrated the life out of Italy, and Italy had no answers for them.
And he definitely deserved to win, didn't he, David?
Yeah, 100%. And do you know what? And it's almost as if Ireland should have probably scored more goals. Do you know, if you were to be honest, Nathan, you touched on it there, when it's funny because Niall Quinn says it in commentary, they don't have the substitutes board ready, and then like Ray Houghton stays on the pitch, and then Niall goes, imagine if Ray was to score now. And it's a tough chance, but Ray's confidence would have been through the roof after scoring the first half, and then you look at hitting the bar. Like, there was chances for more goals, and they fully deserved it, and I think it is underrated. All
right, so that is it. That is the Classic Game Club. USA 94, one of the great days of Irish football. Irish sport's finest hour was how George Hamilton described it during commentary. David Meyler, Vinny Perth, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, stay safe.